my blood sugar was so high from stress. I could feel it in my body. Like my body felt shaky, nervous, weird. I could feel the effects of that high blood sugar. And then also the next day, like I felt very inflamed the next day.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today I'm joined by Laurie Villareal, aka the Blood Sugar Maven. Laurie is a national board certified health coach, functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner, and longtime endurance athlete and movement educator turned hormone specialist. In today's conversation, we're talking about blood sugar regulation and the connection between blood sugar and inflammation. We explore how blood sugar may be contributing to your symptoms, even if you don't know it, and discuss tips to monitor and improve your blood sugar regulation. Laurie, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I am excited for our conversation. This is such an important topic, and I think the level of understanding out there is like minute. So I'm excited to have the Blood Sugar Maven on the podcast, and I have lots of questions for you. But first, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey. How did you become the Blood Sugar Maven?
Yeah, well, my fascination with blood sugar started when I was a kid, actually. Surprisingly, but because I had two parents with type 2 diabetes. And I could see them pricking their finger to check, not very often, but occasionally pricking their finger. They had a glucometer at home. And I was very curious about health. I became very curious about diabetes because I cared for my parents and also wanted to, as a kid, help my parents out. And I would say that's where my interest in health and also fitness began. Was in my teenage years. And I also began tracking my blood sugar with them because I particularly remember doing it with my mom. Because I would get out the glucometer and think like, hey, let's all check our blood sugar today. Because I thought that's what, diabetics were supposed to be doing on a regular basis. And then I began getting really into exercise because I learned a lot about, what it took to be healthy as a diabetic, but also to prevent diabetes. I was very interested in that. And so I went down a path of actually getting into endurance sports. So I became an endurance athlete in my early 20s, the beginning of my 20s. Prior to that, I was really also into fitness, mostly strength training, but it was in that, in that period, I just thought like, I want to be as healthy as I can be so I can prevent diabetes, which also ran in my family, especially one side of my family. So I knew that there was a potential for me to have those genetics. But it wasn't until I was in my mid 30s that I began to discover my health wasn't, like my health seemed like it was kind of falling apart, and I was active and I ate well and I was doing all the things that I thought were supposed to be good for my health, right? I thought I was taking care of myself. So it was at that point when I started to dive into kind of other methodologies around health, and I discovered functional medicine and functional nutrition and just this idea of root cause medicine. And it's through that education and that interest that I began to realize that actually I was probably overdoing. I was overdoing it. And even though as a trainer, because I was also training, I ended up becoming a trainer, a fitness trainer, and a endurance coach. and I was performing at a very high level, and so were all of my clients, and I knew a lot about how to balance stress in order to recover well, right? So that was very important. So I was able to maintain a pretty high stress load because of my focus on recovery and doing everything, the sleep, doing everything you needed to do in lifestyle to be able to recover from
Right.
that stress load. But it wasn't until other lifestyle stress really began to pile on in my life.
Hmm.
So like, my dad got sick and died, and some other
I'm
things were
sorry.
going on in our family that, the stress of that combined with,
Tips into, yeah.
yeah, that was
Yep.
my tipping point, right? That was my tipping point.
Yeah.
And then I was just committed at that point to like to look at health from a whole new lens, right? Which was not, and I must say, even for a while, it was mostly with a focus on outward appearance than inner health.
Okay.
Um, so that was my shift. And then I've been interested in blood sugar ever since. I've been tracking my blood sugar ever since because I wanted to always check in on how I was doing, and how was my health evolving towards diabetes, or was I, keeping myself in the safe zone. But it was through this that I began to use these tools with my clients because I knew the importance of blood sugar health. I was beginning to learn the importance of blood sugar health and how important blood sugar was, um, as as keeping blood sugar healthy, because that could be a determinant on, if you have a disease state or not, or inflammation, or, it could be an underlying root of a lot of conditions. So we began to check in on blood sugar, and actually I started to see some interesting things using real-time data, and how different people can have such different blood sugar. Like
Sure.
it could,
Yeah. There's, yep.
yeah, and even somebody who looks and appears to be very healthy and very fit can have a very different blood sugar profile from somebody who maybe doesn't.
Yeah.
And that started really to surprise me. And then I also started to learn with using data with my clients and seeing how related it was to their symptoms. And when we were able to dial things in and make adjustments that are appropriate specifically from them, so not just
Right.
generalized,
Because we're
rec
individuals.
exactly, exactly.
I want to
Um,
touch on tracking and collecting
yeah,
data and stuff in a bit.
yeah,
But
sure.
I want everybody to understand that this conversation is for them. So let's talk a little bit about, somebody who maybe doesn't have any diabetes in their family, has never had any kind of diagnosis around blood sugar. Let's talk about blood sugar regulation and what is balanced blood sugar versus not. And the not is where we're creating all kinds of problems. But like you said,
Right.
we might not know. And
We
so I
might not
really
know.
want
No,
listeners to know, like, this is really important, even if no doctor has ever mentioned blood sugar.
absolutely. And I would say if you have symptoms, if you have symptoms, if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman in middle age, especially if you're a driven,
Yeah,
ambitious, high achieving woman, right? You could probably got a lot on your plate. I would say checking in on your blood sugar is a smart thing to do. And the reason is um, because blood sugar dysregulation is not something that a doctor is going to diagnose unless maybe you have insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes. But before that, we can have a lot going on with dysregulated blood sugar before we even get to that place. And it's actually the dysregulated blood sugar that gets us there.
right.
So what that looks like is blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day, and swings from highs to lows throughout the day. And this can affect people differently, um, because some people can really feel symptoms when they have hot, blood sugar highs and they have blood sugar lows. But also, the body is constantly trying to bring the body back into balance. And it's also trying to bring your blood sugar back into balance. So that's its job all day long, is to bring your blood sugar back to your more or less baseline, is what I talk about, the baseline. But with somebody with a lot of blood sugar dysregulation, they may not have much of a baseline because their blood sugar might be up and down all day long. So the body can struggle to figure out where that baseline is, and it's constantly using different levers, different hormones to bring your blood sugar back into balance. And some of those hormones, for example, are cortisol and adrenaline.
Yep.
So even people um, who maybe have a little trouble with stress or having, turning down the stress. I always think like blood sugar is an important thing to look at, because if your blood sugar is like up and down and up and down and up and down all day, and you're constantly calling upon cortisol and adrenaline, then you might have a hard time calming down from that stress. And then
And the
also,
opposite
yes, I was
too.
about to say, and also
Like,
the
yeah.
stress is elevating your blood sugar. So sometimes I see that, actually a lot of times, because I think we have similar clients.
Yes, we
Like
do.
that high high achieving driven
Mhm.
person who is often, you know, experiencing stress, and not that stress is a bad thing, right? We stress can also be good. But
It's
if
one of my favorite, like, I feel like you can say things to people over and over and over again, but when they can either feel it, and if they can't feel it, when they
Yes,
can see the data, it's one of the things
exactly.
I love about continuous glucose monitors, because I've had so many clients be like, "Oh my gosh, I
I
saw it."
know.
I had this like really frustrating meeting and my blood sugar just like shot up. And I'm like, yes, it's not just food.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
just food, and often I find it's the stress.
Yeah.
And then when you have a lot of stress and you have a lot of blood sugar peaks because of stress, it also makes it makes it harder for you to regulate the foods, right?
Right.
So this dysregulation creates more dysregulation. So the better balance you have, the better your blood sugars are balanced, the easier it is for your body to have maybe a treat and not have the same impact. So,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to look at your blood sugar and see what your triggers are, how dysregulated it is, how you can bring it back into balance. And then also too, there's that inflammation piece, which I don't know if we're gonna get to.
Well, we have to. I mean, that's this is the Inspired Living with
I
Autoimmunity
know.
podcast. So
Uh-huh.
yes,
I figured.
please let's
I
connect this blood sugar regulation or dysregulation to inflammation. How is blood sugar dysregulation driving inflammation behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's the peaks, the spikes, um, are contributors to inflammation. So somebody that's having very dysregulated blood sugar, that's having these highs and lows, is having like little hits, of to your inflammatory, like
Yeah.
little inflammatory hits throughout the day, like these, like what I've seen, for example, for myself, I've had my highest on my continuous glucose monitor. So I track my own blood sugar sometimes, but the highest spike that I saw for myself was quite high, actually. The highest one I've ever seen, and I was very surprised, was at like 11 p.m. at night when we had to go to the emergency room for a family member. In the middle of the night, I hadn't eaten in like 8 hours.
Yep.
My blood sugar was so high from stress, but not only that, I could feel it in my body. Like my body felt like shaky, nervous, weird, also cortisol, right?
Yep.
But I could feel the effects of that high blood sugar. And then also the next day, like I felt very inflamed the next day,
Yeah.
and
I love
triggered.
when baseline is so good that you can feel that,
Yeah, right.
and you can put your finger on, oh, I know this is exactly what happened.
Yeah. And then
Um,
the next day, the foods, like the foods that maybe weren't inflammatory for me suddenly became inflammatory, right? Everything seemed inflammatory the next day because I had that really high spike that lasted for a little while. And I wasn't looking at it. I wasn't looking at it while all this stuff is going on. I'm not like, let me check my blood sugar in the middle
well,
of
which is
this
good
event.
because sometimes and then drives cortisol higher, and So it was actual data. We're not interfering with the data. And we talk about this so often when we talk about sleep, and people have that wake up, 2,
Mhm.
3 in the morning, and it's like chicken or, having to unravel. Are you getting a cortisol spike, which is driving blood sugar, or is your blood sugar dropping, which is creating a cortisol spike, which is,
Yes.
is so playing with
Yeah.
that. But the stress response and blood sugar are so connected.
Yes.
I want to
And then,
touch on, you mentioned, we may not, you're in a place where you know what you're feeling when you're feeling it. And so we can have dysregulated blood sugar and not know it.
mhm.
For the people that maybe do feel some things, what are, you mentioned, that kind of shaky feeling, but what are some symptoms that people may discount? We all, we only live in our own body, right? So what are some things that might create that question mark of like, I wonder if I should check my blood sugar?
Well, fatigue is a big one.
Ah, well, that's
Fatigue.
everybody who has any kind of active autoimmune stuff going on.
Fatigue is a big one. And I would say another big one I do see is um, weight loss resistance or weight gain, unexplained weight gain. Like maybe I'm doing the same things as I've always been doing. I've been doing the same workouts, eating the same foods, and gaining weight, particularly around the midsection, can be another one. Um, Things like getting up to pee in the middle of the night. It can be actually quite disruptive to sleep. Getting up to pee in the middle of the night, or even just waking up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I have seen be related to blood sugar.
And I'm sure
Um,
listeners are like, wait, I thought all of those things you just said also are, could be connected to hormone changes. And we have to remember, insulin is
yes,
a hormone. Like this is
yes,
all connected
absolutely,
to our hormone
absolutely,
system. So
absolutely.
yeah.
And then cravings, like feeling like you want maybe carbs all day, or you're snackish or hungry or even hangry. Not feeling like you can go very long without food.
Grazers got to be
Yes.
great. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But then you can also see it in other ways. Like I've seen it show up in period problems. I've seen it show up in hair loss. I've seen it show up in skin issues, digestive issues. Um, because we talked about how that creates inflammation, having dysregulated blood sugar, and then also over time dysregulated blood sugar can turn into high levels, like your baseline and your levels can just start to creep up as well. So those higher levels of blood sugar can create just inflammation, like levels of inflammation all day long once they start creeping up. And so having a look into blood sugar can also help calm some of that, which helps calm other symptoms.
Wow. So, I'm like, oh, okay. Again, because we know there's never one cause of anything, and we're
Right.
having this conversation because every symptom you just mentioned, people also can have when their blood sugar's fine, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
again, that's how it can become overlooked until, you mentioned insulin resistance. And I'm thinking, but like Western medicine docs, like general practitioners here, they don't, they're not catching anything until somebody has full blown metabolic syndrome. Like
Right.
they're not even looking for it. We do in functional medicine, we're looking to make sure things aren't giving us any signs that we're heading in the wrong direction. Um, so because I don't, I always feel like it's kind of turned into, when we talk about toxins, it becomes so overwhelming. It's like, holy moly. So let's shift to like things we can do. First of all, how do we investigate? What is a great way? People can, you don't need well, in this country, a little bit. I don't know about where you are. Things like CGMs are mostly prescription only in the United
Yes.
States still. Are they there? I know in the
They're not.
UK, you
No.
can go into the grocery
Yeah.
or drugstore and get one yourself.
It's the same. Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
same.
because you're allowed to have your own data.
Hmm.
Um, but is that where you tell people to start or,
Yeah, I'd say checking in, like you had mentioned, you could be told by your doctor that your blood sugar is normal and you still have blood sugar dysregulation, right?
right.
So checking in on a continuous glucose monitor could be a smart thing to do. I always like to say check in on it with a practitioner because it's nice to know a little bit more about what the data means, what you can do with the data, and also to not freak out from the data,
Right.
right? To be Googling things and not understanding exactly because certain things like exercise can elevate blood sugar, like I said, stress can elevate blood sugar, and also there are a lot of strategies. So once you
Yes.
have the data and you can see what your triggers are, maybe what your levels are, what you look like throughout the day. And I especially like the data at night, especially if anybody's struggling with sleep,
Yes.
quality sleep or quality restoration. I'd say the data can be very helpful, especially when you're using a practitioner like yourself. Um, and then having those strategies that the practitioner has as well that can help you look at the data objectively and then decide, okay, like this is happening in the middle, you're having a blood sugar dip in the middle of the night, so let's look at your whole day. And maybe there's a shift that's needed in the evening, or maybe there's a
Right.
shift that's needed in the morning. But also, aside from just having data with continuous glucose monitors, you don't even need a continuous glucose monitor to get started with, really. You could start with just paying attention um, to your food intake and noticing if you have protein, fat, and fiber with your meals. I would even say, sometimes fat sometimes fat is enough, sometimes fiber is enough. We respond a little bit differently, each of us, but protein, fat, and fiber can help slow down the release of blood sugar into the bloodstream, and having that with each meal or snack can help keep your blood sugar levels a bit more stable. Everybody's
Yes.
different, but that's a good place to start. um I would also say something as simple as staying
Right. I
hydrated
love that. Yep.
can also help keep your blood sugar in better check. Um, Having a good night's sleep, because a disrupted night's sleep can also create more disruption in your blood sugar the next day. So good sleep and movement throughout the day,
Yes.
especially after meals.
Yeah, I love all the studies, and there's a lot of data about just taking a walk after a meal and
Yeah,
how
I
that
see it.
supports blood sugar regulation. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I see it for myself. I see it for clients, my husband. Just something as simple as a walk is enough to bring
Yeah.
glucose levels down. And also there are things like a simple exercise like legs up the wall. Who would have thought works so well
Mm.
for me? If I just lay on if I'm feeling maybe a little bit stressed, or I just had a workout and I know my heart rate's up and I was a bit excited, and um I could just lay on the floor, lift my feet up, put my legs up against the wall, and that alone helps bring my body into a more relaxed state. So it activates the parasympathetic nervous system for me and for a lot of people that I suggest this to, and can help bring your stress levels down and therefore bring your blood sugar down as well, which is interesting to see. So
And
bringing
it's a
in
great,
more,
those kinds of inversions are really
yeah,
good for sleep too,
exactly.
for the
So
same
more.
reasons.
Yeah, inversions. So you mentioned inversions. So inversions and any kind of restful, restorative moments you can have in your day can also have a positive impact on your glucose levels as well.
It's such gold. Again, because we're so trained, we have all been so trained to think, we're back to like calories in, calories out, but like
Yeah.
sugar in is the, end all be all for blood sugar regulation.
Mm.
And it's just not true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Ah,
There's
so
so much you
good.
can do.
So much you can do. I love that. So, oh my goodness. paying attention, it was where you said people can really, really start. And I love and again, if you're experimental, find a practitioner, reach out to Laurie, reach out to me, and you can gain so much data just by being curious. If you decide to go the CGM, continuous glucose monitor route, it is really fun and I encourage people, like, okay, I know I've always said, eat your fruit with some fat and some protein, but, while you have the CGM on, eat it once without, or,
Yeah.
play so that you
Yes.
really can understand what's going on. And I love, none of us get to live in a stress-free state. So I love that you're sharing, your personal techniques of like, hey, if I work out a little too hard or I'm a little too stressed, like here's a way I can get my body back in, and I say visit the parasympathetic state, like you
Yeah,
mentioned
exactly.
throughout the day, because that is an exercise.
Uh-huh.
And so, it's not only going to help you regulate your blood sugar, but bring that inflammation down, digest your food, all the things.
Absolutely.
So I love that you brought that up because I had no idea we were going to talk about legs up the wall when we were talking about blood sugar.
It's my favorite. I mean, 'cause it works
Yeah.
for me.
Are there certain tests, or if somebody is curious, maybe they don't have a practitioner, they're maybe not ready to go to the CGM, checking things out. Is anything for them to test? I mean, the problem I know with tests is it's a snapshot in time.
Mhm.
So I don't really know of a better way or another way that's nearly as good, unless you want to like prick your finger a million times. But um, I don't
Yeah, and
recommend
even
that.
well, and even if you do that, I think it's not going to be
You're missing stuff.
yeah, and it's not going to be any actually I think you could just as easily get a continuous glucose monitor if you're going to get the finger prick, and it's not
Yeah.
that different in price actually.
Yeah.
Because you
And
end up
it's way
spending a
more
lot of
comfortable and you get better
yeah,
data.
exactly.
Let's talk about CGMs for a second. Um, are some better than others? If someone's like, okay, this has kind of been on the back of my mind for a while. I want to do it. Um, Obviously, if they're taking your advice and they're working with a practitioner, they're going to use whatever the practitioner is recommending. But are they all good? Is basically my question.
Um, so my favorite one is I think there are a lot of them more and more out there right now. Um, my favorite is Abbott's Freestyle Libre is what it's
Okay.
called. It's pretty small. It's like a cord, the size of a quarter. It fits on your arm. You can get it from there are several companies out right now that offer them straight direct to the consumer. So you don't have to have a prescription. You can also
Right.
ask your doctor for a prescription, and if they're really cool, they might say yes.
For
um,
sure.
if they know
Yeah.
anything about it, right? I
Yeah.
think they need to know about how these work and how it could help and support you in order for them to say yes. But then in addition, if you work with a practitioner, of course, they can also help support you in being able to use one. And some of the companies that are direct to consumer that use them have apps. They have a little bit of nutrition information. And I would say I'd like to say take some of that with a grain of salt because
You
it can be
think?
very generalized
Yep.
and less supportive because it's general information. So that's why I think it's really nice to work with a practitioner because they can really help personalize it for you and figure out what works for you. Like for an example, sometimes I've seen things like fasting is great for blood sugar, and it can be, but it can also not be,
Right.
right? If it's creating more stress in your
It
body,
depends. Yeah.
right?
I love that.
So
And
yeah,
different, yeah, and that's such great advice. Because sometimes some of that generalized information is just really rubs me the wrong way because sometimes it's just not appropriate for the individual. I would say, we play with Dexcoms as well. I mean,
Mhm.
there's so many. There's more and more new companies.
Mhm.
For Freestyle Libre is really to me, the original consumer-friendly CGM. But think about also what works for you. You know, there are
Right.
some CGMs where you have to scan it to get the data. There's some where so you maybe miss certain windows of data. There's
Yeah.
some that are, the app really is truly continuous.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of, and prices really have come down.
They have.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
which is fun.
Yes.
And I do notice they're always changing too. So it's like,
Yes.
okay, we get crafty with, who's got the best prices right now in the US, as far as sometimes it really does make a difference of which pharmacy you go to pick it up. So
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've heard some things like you can get deals at Costco.
Yeah,
for-
that's what I was just thinking. And you can, but then I had a client who literally, 2 weeks later was going to go to Costco and it was double the price.
Yeah.
There was something at the beginning of the year. I hate to be like conspiracy theory, but like all of the CGM surged in price. And maybe it's because it was the beginning of the year and people are
Huh.
health
Oh,
focused. I don't
interesting.
know. Yeah, and so it was like, oh, and then I think here in the US, like, Walmart had the good price. It's always changing. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
you just
So
get
yeah,
a little crafty.
yeah, exactly. And those are interesting. And you would ask earlier about tests, and I would say tests to look at could be the HbA1c, your fasting glucose levels, and insulin.
Yeah.
And insulin's a really good one actually, to fasting insulin and fasting glucose, and even doing I don't know if you call it the HOMA IR over there. Is that what
I don't know what that is.
So you get both the fasting glucose and the insulin done at the same time.
Right.
And so that can give you an
It gives you
idea
that.
of how they are related at that
Yes,
same point
which
in
is
time.
that's exactly what is missing in standard Western medicine, at least here. They're not testing fasting insulin.
Yeah.
If your glucose seems like it's fine and in range, they leave it at that. And why I
Yeah.
love the A1C is because, I'm gonna throw my mother under the bus because I love her and I can. My mom has been a sugaraholic my whole life anyway, and she's really adorable. She lives right next door. She's,
Oh.
thank goodness, healthy and vibrant and knows all the lifestyle things, and sometimes reverts to, I'm going to live on gelato for the week,
Mhm.
or and so her blood sugar is always beautiful on labs because she knows when she's getting labs done.
Yeah.
So, but the A1C does not lie. It's
Lie.
going to
It doesn't lie.
show you. So what it's not going to do is really show you, are you having spikes and fluctuating a lot, but it
No,
is going to
it's not.
show you like, hey, you think you've been, eating less sugar, but yet your A1C is higher. You
Right.
need to dig a little deeper. So I love that one in particular,
Yes.
for honesty, for
Yeah.
honest feedback, and
I
again of over time, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Yes. And that in a way is kind of giving us an indication of your baseline.
Right.
And then two, when you look at that through the conventional lens, so like your doctor typically, or pathological lens, right? Like they may not, they may say your blood sugar is fine and it still could be at a pretty higher than optimal level, right?
Right.
For maybe for feeling your best, or reducing inflammation, or recovering, or putting a condition into remission, right? You might want to bring that down lower. So that's another reason why it's helpful to work with somebody to figure out what that could look like.
Absolutely. Because again, so, and we're talking a lot about the non-food related drivers, stress
Right.
and things like that, but also, so my partner has a patient at the clinic who's always had a beautiful A1C, what had some GI issues that we didn't know about, went to a GI doctor and they put him on the BRAT diet, which is bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. And this gentleman was consuming so much applesauce he literally gave himself diabetes.
Oh
He
my
went
gosh.
from totally fine. So diet does count too.
Yeah. Yeah,
But I
absolutely.
mean, it is always so, and he's correcting it. It's all good. But luckily, has a functional medicine provider who's testing and following because, another doctor told him basically just, live on carbs and sugar for a few months and see how you feel.
Oh gosh.
So it is, food definitely can play a role
Well,
too.
he
Yeah.
learned some things from that
Yeah.
experience.
But I can tell you're a data geek like I am. And so to have that data is like, wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
like to also say I love data. I've been using it for a long time, but I usually tell my clients that, I look at the trends most of all.
Yes.
Trends over time, and I'm not a slave to my data. Like I will easily take it off, not wear it for a while,
I
check
don't
back
have
in
one on right
later.
now. Yeah.
Like I don't let my data stress me out. It's just information.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yeah. But it can be fun if you're
It's fun
playful and you
for
hold it
sure.
lightly.
Exactly.
It can be really fun
I
to.
can. I love it.
So we're at that point in the interview where I get to ask you for
Yeah.
one step that listeners get to take starting today to improve their health. And it doesn't even have to be blood sugar related. Totally up to you.
Oh, one
I
step
know.
today.
Uh-huh.
Well, I would say it's a personal favorite. So there are a lot of steps anybody could take to improve their
Yes.
health. I love finding your personal stress buffers, I call them. So dipping into the parasympathetic. Um, I think you were saying that, dipping
Yeah.
into the parasympathetic mode. And my favorites are inversions,
Ah,
like legs up the wall. They're so simple, they're so easy. And I've even told people that like you can get on your phone and check your email if you want to. Like if you have a hard time turning
you don't have
down,
to meditate. It doesn't
you
have to
can
be.
start simple. You can start simple with just doing something, um, like laying on the ground and putting a couple pillows underneath your hips,
Yeah.
right? That's another one that's a great um and also pay attention to how you feel while you're doing it, because if it doesn't feel good, right, if it's stressing you out, okay, maybe it's not the thing for you, but find the thing that
If
you
that
like to
stresses
do
you
and
out,
enjoy
so
it.
you need it. I, come
It's
on, you're
probably
being really
it's
gentle, but then again, get curious. Why would laying down for a minute
exactly.
stress you out? I did have a client who, when we were doing some breathing techniques, because she just totally always lived in a high stress state. She was the first person who had given me the feedback of, she was like, I'm doing it, but it would bump her heart rate because it was such an
Mhm.
unfamiliar feeling for
Yeah,
her body to
yeah,
leave the sympathetic state. She stuck with it. It didn't take very long, maybe like a week, for her body to be like, oh, I remember that. That actually
yeah,
feels really nice. So
absolutely.
clearly, I'm not as gentle as Lori. You need to do it more often if it stresses you out to do it.
Or find the one there are lots of them. Find the one that works for you, right?
Yeah, but I love that one because it can trick you, obviously, if it's not a painful position for you.
Right.
Because as you even just said, like, you're giving the grace of, you can check your phone, you can,
Right.
it's
If you need to,
still,
it's a good place to start.
yes, yes. Oh, I love it. For people that are listening on the go and are not going to check the show notes, where's the best place to find you?
I would say the best place is probably if you just typed in yourbloodsugarquiz.com.
There you
And then
go.
you could take my quiz and check in on your blood sugar. And you can easily find more out about me. And otherwise, you can certainly find me at my website, which might be a little tricky because it's my name at laurievillareal.com. So it's LAURIE VILLARREAL. So that's my website, but you can easily get there by just going to yourbloodsugarquiz.com and taking my quiz.
Perfect. So easy to remember. Laurie, thank you so much. You gave us amazing gold today.
So good to be here. And thanks everybody who's been listening along.
For everyone listening, remember you can get those transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.